Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. You're watching Alaska Weather. Thanks for joining us tonight on this 2nd of October. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information from the National Weather Service. You can do that easily by calling us at the Alaska Weather Information Line, 1-800-472-0391. Find us online at weather.gov/Alaska. That's your whole statewide view. If you click the map one time, it'll take you to your local weather forecast office with your latest watches, warnings, and advisories. And if you can't find what you're looking for, let me know. David.Snider@noaa.gov. Happy to serve you any way I can. Let's get right to it. A lot going on across the interior and across the west coast. Let's start here in the east where snow's been falling today. We expect to see another inch or so from the Yukon Flats, the 40-mile country into the Middle Tanana Valley's higher terrain around 2,000 feet and above. The eastern Alaska Range and Denali, winter weather advisories will continue there until midnight. Again, maybe another inch or so of accumulation before that really winds down. A winter storm watch posted for the southeastern Brooks Range there. That, again, expected to see a little more winter as we go into the next several days there, maybe 5 to 8 inches of snow possible. To the west, winter storm warnings are in effect for the southwestern parts of the Brooks Range. Again, this is all the south-facing summits from Ambler out toward Kiana, the Red Dog Mine. This entire region could be looking at 8 to 12 inches of snow with as much as 14 in some cases there. Again, we're looking at snow falling in the region starting very late Thursday night and into Friday. It should really ramp up into the weekend. Now let's shift down toward the Norton Sound region. All the areas painted here in red, including Nome, Golovin, all the way through Unalakleet, Shaktoolik, Unum, Ikwa, all the way down towards Scammon Bay. We're looking at coastal flood warnings there because remember yesterday we were talking about a big push of westerly wind flowing through, and that's really going to push a lot of water toward the Norton Sound region and the south-facing shorelines of the Seward Peninsula. So in this area we're talking about water, coastal flooding that could come up anywhere from 5 to 7 feet to as much as 6 to 10 feet above the normal high tide line for this entire region. So tonight's the night. Move stuff away from the coastline there if you're around the Norton Sound region, and again all the way from Nome to Golovin, all the way down through Shaktoolik, and even as you get down into the Kuskokwim Delta regions, even for places like Newtok, the water should not be as high in those areas, but it is going to come up. So in all of these regions, it's a good idea to move your stuff away from the coast. We are expecting some flooding in the Norton Sound region, again, for all those regions shaded in red, anywhere from 5 to 7 to as much as 6 to 10 feet above the normal high tide line. Now, in the yellow areas, St. Lawrence Island and the western end of the Seward Peninsula, a coastal flood advisory is in effect. We're not expecting it to be quite as bad as what we will see in the Norton Sound region. But there could be some water that comes up about 3 to 5 feet above the normal high tide line. And again, a coastal flood watch is posted for the Kotzebue Sound region and the northern parts of the Chukchi Coast. Again, that would be around 3 to 5 feet. Perhaps it could start as early as Friday morning. So a lot going on, a lot of winter, a lot of wind, and a lot of water coming up into parts of western Alaska. So be extra careful out there. And use weather.gov/Alaska and listen to your local weather information sources for more updates as we go. Here's a look at the satellite picture, and we'll start quickly in the east. A low pressure system across the Gulf that's been slinging some leftover rainfall across southeast really starting to wind down. This is no longer going to be any significant concern at all. We have some warmer air that's trying to push northward that's working its way into the central and eastern Aleutians. Again, just kind of grazing the chain in the Alaska Peninsula and then drying out as it moves east. And we have another weather system pulling out of the central and eastern interior, but this is what's causing us snow across the central and eastern interior and the higher terrain. All of these regions here probably only talking about another inch or so of snowfall on top of what you've already had today. And in some cases, though, that could be a good significant first snow for many. Then the next concern is what's coming in from the west. As a powerful jet stream works across the north and western part of the Bering, we're looking at wind speeds at the top of the atmosphere that are running around 150 to 160 knots. And you'll see that in the aviation maps here in just a minute. But what that's doing at the surface is gathering up a lot of water and working that toward the Norton Sound region. And that could mean coastal flooding again with water levels coming up anywhere from 5 to 6 feet above normal high tide line to as much as 8 to 10 feet above for some parts of the Norton Sound region, southern Seward Peninsula, and down the Yukon coastline there. And even other areas down into the Kuskokwim could see at least some minor rises. And we'll be watching for this to play out as early as Thursday night, tomorrow night. and then really ramping up Friday into Saturday before it starts to let up a little bit as we get into Sunday. So this is going to be a several-day kind of event. Here's a weather map today as we see it. Low pressures over the Gulf. Again, some rain across southeast, and then snowfall working through. We don't have a lot of reports of the observations showing snow, but down below it's been rain for many locations at lower elevations. So that's good news there. Hopefully not too much of a mess where you are. Out to the west, though, rain is working across the west coast, and then we're watching this weather system here rapidly deepen as it moves toward the Gulf of Anadyr across eastern Russia at 994 millibars. Already by tonight, we should start to see rain and snow across parts of the northwest. Snow again returning to the western Brooks Range as snow is leaving the eastern sections. And as we get into Thursday, the system should drop to about 985 millibars. We expect to see snow really starting to fly across parts of the Brooks Range there. And again, winter storm warnings are posted for those regions for significant accumulations. And it looks like this is going to be fairly warm for many locations up and down the west coast, but it's the wind that's really going to be the issue as that's pushing that fetch of water into parts of Norton Sound. By Friday, the low pressure system across the Chukchi Sea is deepening to about 976 millibars. It's a potent low pressure. And as that works into the western Alaska, you can see how that really gathers up that westerly flow and pushes that right into the lower parts of the western coastline itself. The colder air will continue to spill eastward, and wouldn't be surprised to see some snow across some of the higher terrain for south central, certainly the Alaska Range once again, and all the while the Brooks Range should be looking at some significant snow accumulations, especially on those south-facing slopes. Here's a look at your temperatures Thursday morning. 30s and 40s in southeast, south central, looking at temperatures just above freezing. 44 in Kodiak, lower 40s for Bristol Bay, about 36 in Nome. The North Slope temperatures driving just below the freezing point for Prudhoe Bay and Atkasuk, up toward Utqiagvik and Wainwright. Temps will be at or above freezing, it looks like. Same goes for Kaktovik. You'll sit around 37 degrees in Kaktovik on Thursday, lower 40s for the Chukchi Coast, and much warmer weather down the west coast with temperatures near the lower to mid 50s. Kodiak, about 54. Windy at times around Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, 51, 50 in St. Paul, and mid to upper 50s for many in southeast. Overnight lows on Friday morning, still hovering in the upper 30s and lower 40s there. Much cooler across the eastern interior, 21 for Arctic Village, 29 around Prudhoe Bay, 36 in Nome and windy. Look for lower to mid 40s for Southwest, 45 in St. Paul, Macoriac 42. A high temperature there at 48. Again, watching for coastal flooding across parts of the Norton Sound region by Friday, 42 in St. Lawrence Island. Looks like Wainwright should hold around 41. Fairbanks 45 and Homer about 50 degrees.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And on to your aviation forecast now. IFR concerns will overspread a large part of southwestern Alaska into the interior, the middle Yukon Valley, and the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range, where we have a lot of air moving up into higher elevations, creating a fairly dense cloud pack and lowered ceiling. Across the upper Yukon, the upper Tanana, all the way down to the Copper River Valley, and pretty much a large section of the Susitna Valley, Matanuska Valley, and then back into the Kodiak Island region. MVFR should be the predominant issue that we see in the morning. For southeast, central, and southern parts of the Panhandle, at least MVFR, higher terrain around Hyder and just east of Ketchikan, likely starting off with IFR concerns, and there will be some areas of convection off the southern outer coast. To the west we go, and the next weather system will be dragging quite a bit of lowered ceilings and plenty of cloud cover. Look for an IFR start there on Thursday morning. You can see how that really focuses in on that strong westerly flow coming into parts of western Alaska, especially the YK Delta to St. Lawrence Island, the southern Bering Strait, and Nunivak Island. Across the eastern chain, the Alaska Peninsula, IFR will continue into the afternoon. Watch for the Beaufort Seacoast to see lowered conditions as well. Most of the interior and really most of south central and southwest will be dealing with marginal conditions. But Anchorage and areas through the Forelands, maybe into parts of northern Cook Inlet, will sneak out with VFR. The higher terrain across parts of southeast looking at MVFR conditions, but from this point on, it does look like conditions will remain generally VFR as we go into Friday morning. Watch for a little bit of IFR to sneak back in around Hyder. And again, the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range all the way down the Yukon and the Kuskokwim Delta, and most of the chain will move back to IFR by Friday morning with the Beaufort Seacoast still lingering very close to IFR concerns, but marginal levels will probably be the predominant issue across coastal areas. And then parts of the North Slope start to break up a little bit as we go into the afternoon. You can see that VFR hole. However, on the south approach to Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass, you'll notice IFR concerns there all the way into the Kobuk and Noatak Valley. For parts of the western Alaska Range, this is Susitna Valley into the Talkeetnas and up toward Broad Pass and the Copper River Valley, We're looking at IFR as we go into Friday afternoon. Marginal conditions overtake the Gulf of Alaska. Still looks like VFR for most parts of southeast except for the higher terrain. And as we get out toward the west, looks like a little bit of improvement with VFR developing in the western Bering by the afternoon. Here's your pass conditions in detail now. Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass we expect to remain at marginal levels as we go through your Thursday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass should see improving conditions as we go into the afternoon tomorrow, but an IFR start is likely. Rainy Pass looking to be instrument flight rule to start off your Thursday morning. Look for gradual improvements as the day goes on there, and for Windy Pass for Thursday. Isabel Pass also expecting to see an IFR start throughout the day. Mentasta Pass probably holding at marginal levels as you move down toward Tanita Pass, also looking for similar conditions there. Kind of a marginal level there for Portage in the morning, but some improvement may be seen around parts of Prince William Sound. And Chilkoot and White Pass get a pass with VFR conditions there on Thursday. The surface freezing lines are showing a pattern that makes a lot of sense with that stronger westerly flow coming in. You'll see that in the jet stream in a minute, but you can see the stacking of colder air mainly to the north with warmer weather trying to poke in from the south. Levels there above 10,000 feet from Adak west towards Shemya and Attu. 4 to 6, even 8,000 foot levels there across southwest, and then much colder weather across the interior through the Alaska Range with the surface and 2,000 foot freezing lines clearly in view, though there's still a bubble of some warmer air lingering across some parts of the North Slope. For most of southeast, levels are at or above 4,000 to 6,000 feet. Icing potential is also increasing. The moisture is still blowing in, but with the colder air in place, it's getting a little bit easier to get into that really ideal situation where you can create some icing potential. Levels there about 4,000 to 5,000 feet across the interior with isolated moderate conditions there, and about 4 to 6 across the west coast with some of that warmer air still trying to work its way into parts of southwestern Alaska. Southeast doesn't seem to have much of a threat at this point. Let's take a look at the jet stream. A powerful Pacific jet is blasting in here around 150 knots or so. That's really going to move the weather along and also allow some of that colder air to start pushing into more parts of the mainland and more parts of Alaska as we go. A trough of low pressure sits across southeast, and you can see several other disturbances coming across the North Pacific. At 9,000 feet, wind speeds anywhere from 40 to 85 knots coming across the Bering. Coming into most of the interior around 20 to 25 around the southwest. And it looks like more of a ridge of high pressure holding on to southeastern Alaska with fairly light winds there through your Thursday. At 3,000 feet, again, those strong winds are certainly predominant across the Bering, slowing down a little bit as they move into western Alaska, but wind speeds up around the Chukchi coast all the way down to Bristol Bay, still holding anywhere from 30 to 50 knots. Wind speeds are slower across the interior, around the North Slope, about 20 knots. Light winds for southeast in the Gulf, and again, you can see a little bit more of a westerly flow, 25 to 45 across the Aleutians. Turbulence concerns continue in the west tomorrow, below 6,000 feet.
When you think of a national park, you probably envision wide open natural spaces undisturbed by human activity. There are indeed such places, but even in some of the most remote areas of a place like Kenai Fjords National Park in Alaska, the mark of man is present. Marine debris is a menace to the farthest reaches of our globe, and even designated national park lands are not immune. In the summer of 2009, the Resurrection Bay Conservation Alliance, a grassroots conservation organization based in Seward, Alaska, decided to do something about the marine debris fouling the beaches of Kenai Fjords National Park. Marine debris coordinator Tim Johnson had first-hand experience with the issue.
The summer before, my wife and I, Michelle, had done a paddle from Seward, sea kayak paddle from Seward to Homer. Really, our eyes were open to some areas that we didn't realize there was so much accumulation. It was really deceiving up front. You couldn't really get a feel for the extent and impact of it. You've got this nice high tide line that's quite pristine, and you really don't get a picture for the impact, the amount of debris in that area until you get behind those storm berms. You get back into the lagoons and the vegetation around those lagoons. And then you see the absolute extent back into that veg and how intertwined and enmeshed these decades of trash deposition. So we were just appalled by that and said we got to get something together on a larger scale.
The Resurrection Bay Conservation Alliance is a local nonprofit community organization, and they have been instrumental in helping the Park Service obtain funding to to get boats, larger boats to help move the debris, and they get volunteer labor and organize the work trips. And so it's really a partnership between the Park Service and the community to help get out and really get a project done that in and of itself any one group couldn't do on their own.
Most of that trash was baggable. However, there were large items, huge, piles of hauser line, for example, that we just had to hoist up onto the boat.
The volunteers didn't just bag, haul, and hoist the garbage, but also carefully recorded what types of debris were collected.
In many ways, the debris itself is a resource. Archaeologists use middens, the trash heaps, as a way of analyzing past cultures. And in one sense, marine debris is a form of a midden. It's a trash heap that left for the future would be something that people could use to analyze our culture. It may not say the best things about our culture or everything that we want, but we need to be able to document what we've done so that we can preserve that legacy, make sure that we as a society don't forget what we've been doing.
We had two larger categories of marine debris that we picked up. Commercial fishing means like, say, gill nets, large hauser lines, anything that would be associated with more of a commercial fishing scale. And then the second category was more recreational fishing and household, which would be general plastics, things like that. So we had about a 75% of the commercial fishing marine debris element, and about 25% of the recreational and household further out the bay. And we had the exact opposite the closer we got to Seward. Within the bay, it was about 25% commercial fishing versus 75% recreational fishing and household.
The trash is not just unsightly for park visitors, but also poses threats to wildlife and marine habitat.
Really one of the larger issues now that you go to this plastic that can really get into the food web and affect the food web differently than something like glass.
These substances, for instance, all these polystyrene blocks that are breaking down into all these little crumbly bits are further breaking down on a microscopic level, and how much of an impact that has, in this ecosystem is yet to be determined, but I think it's got pretty high potential.
Well known that sea turtles will eat plastic bags floating in the water. They look like jellyfish to a sea turtle, and obviously a plastic bag doesn't go well in the digestive system of a turtle. Albatross will see small pieces of plastic floating on the surface and think they're small fish and other food sources and eat that in their stomachs, especially in some of the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. They'll find dead albatross that have starved to death with a full stomach, and it's full of pieces of plastic.
We're affecting our local areas this way, but we need to be thinking about it from more of a state and global international scale. And most importantly, to try and focus on prevention of it coming in the first place. Because we're just going to see this continuing, to build up on our beaches unless we're able to get a little bit more of an approach on prevention on the front end.
Marine debris is really a global problem, in all the oceans, and there are many different sources. Global shipping is one. Fishing debris from commercial fishing, recreational boating activity, activity on land, stuff blowing off land, washing down streams, people just throwing stuff on the shore.
Though the problem can seem overwhelming, Johnson remains upbeat about making a positive difference.
No, you gotta start locally. You gotta take control of what you can do, and make something with that, and try and move on from there.
Overall, more than 9 tons of debris was removed from the beaches of Kenai Fjords National Park and transported back to Seward to be deposited in a landfill.
People gave a lot to the project in order to make it happen. That was awesome. One of the most amazing experiences I've ever had, being able to put that large of a group of volunteers together, dedicated volunteers to put that much effort and give that much time and pull all the different agencies together to see it all happen was incredible. It was incredible. Yeah, very fulfilling experience.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And back with your marine weather now, and again, apologies for the sea ice image that we've got for you today as we're adapting and enhancing our Alaska Sea Ice program system there. It's not cooperating with the TV graphics as we usually like, but it's still sea ice, and we are still talking about the main ice pack that's about 350 nautical miles north and east of Utqiagvik and a little bit closer to Kaktovik. But the good news is that marginal ice is seeing some new ice forming inside of that there. So we are adding to the pack there as we passed kind of the seasonal minimum, and we'll continue to update this on weather.gov/Anchorage/ice. You can still get that same old information there, and hopefully we'll have our graphics back in shape pretty soon. Here's a look at southeast now. Generally looking at light winds and small seas on the inside, 10 knots in most cases, 2 to 3 foot seas on the inside, and 6 to 9 foot seas there across the outer coast with that northwesterly flow running around 10 to 15 knots tomorrow, picking up just a little bit more south of Sitka as we get into Friday, 15 to 20, and generally 4 to 6 foot seas on the outside. On the inside, still looking at generally small seas with about 2 to 3 feet in most areas. In the Lynn Canal, though, they could be up to 4 feet on that 20-knot wind coming in from the south on Friday. For Thursday, across South Central, light winds and small seas. Most areas are looking at a gentle westerly flow crossing over Cook Inlet and Prince William Sound, as well as the Northern Gulf. 4 to 5 foot seas on the outside. As we get into Friday, winds are going to pick up there with a southwesterly flow coming up Cook Inlet. 25 to 30, you're looking at about 8 to 10 foot seas in most areas, and 4 to 8 foot seas across the north and western Gulf. A southerly flow inside of Prince William Sound, 20 knots and 4 foot seas there on Friday. For Thursday, south and westerly winds will rule the roost, 10 knots and 2 foot seas inside of Shelikof Strait, 15-knot winds across the Bering Sea coast and Bristol Bay with a 4 to 5 foot sea there. Northeasterlies start to turn in Sandpoint to False Pass, and south and west feeding into low pressure there across the northern Pacific. By Friday, stronger westerly flow will be making its way up and down the west coast. More on that in a minute. 30 to 35 knot winds coming into Bristol Bay with 11 to 12 foot seas. 25 to 30 across the Gulf and Shelikof Strait with 11 foot seas there on Friday afternoon. For the Aleutians, a west and northerly flow working through the central and eastern chain, 20 to 25 knots expected there on Thursday with 7 to 8 foot seas across the Bering Sea coast and 9 to 10, maybe as high as 11 actually, south of Unalaska to Nikolsky on Thursday. With a southwesterly flow across the western chain, 30 knots, 9 to 12 foot seas there on Thursday. That should diminish as we get into Friday, 25 to 30 knot winds for the central and eastern chain, 9 to 11 foot seas in the north and across the Pacific coast, 7 to 8 foot seas expected with westerlies at 25 knots. Now for the west coast, watch this carefully. As west and southwesterly winds pick up on Thursday, we'll see 9 to 11 foot seas out towards St. Matthews. St. Paul, St. George looking at 8 foot seas on the southwest flow, 30 knots there. Southerlies, 15 knots and 3 foot seas for the Norton Sound region. And winds come up sharply for Friday. This will happen early in the morning. And once again, coastal flood warnings are in effect for Norton Sound all the way out toward Nome, including Golovin, Shaktoolik, Elam, Ikwa, all the way down toward Unum. In Scammon Bay, all these regions could be looking at coastal flooding anywhere from 5 to 8 feet, maybe as much as 10 feet above the normal high tide line. So again, coastal flood warnings are in effect for the Yukon Delta, Norton Sound, all the way out toward Nome, and minor flooding is expected even into the Kuskokwim Delta, including places like Newtok. So pay special attention to the weather information coming to your community. 12 to 16-foot seas are expected offshore with those winds at 30 to 40 knots. It should diminish Saturday night into Sunday, so this will be a several-day event. For the North Slope, southerlies offshore 15 to 20, 5 to 6 foot seas there. South and westerlies coming up the Chukchi 15 to 20, looking for 5 to 7 foot seas on Thursday. Winds come up a little bit more on Friday as well around the Chukchi coast. Coastal flood watches are posted for the Kotzebue Sound region as we go into Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. 25-knot winds will increase as we get into Friday night and Saturday. Easterlies are also increasing across the Beaufort Seacoast, 20 to 25, looking for 5 to 7 foot seas they're building on Friday. Recapping tonight's weather, showers are slowing down for parts of southeastern Alaska. Rain and snow continues across the interior. Winter weather advisories there will last until midnight for Denali, the eastern Alaska Range, all the way into the Yukon Flats. 40-mile country and areas around the middle Tanana Valley above 2,000 feet. Again, maybe another inch or so on top of what you've already seen. Then all eyes turn to the storm moving across the northern Bering as we go into Thursday night, and into Friday. A strong westerly flow will be pushing water into Norton Sound, the Yukon Delta, and parts of the Kotzebue Sound region could be in jeopardy as well. We're watching for some significant wave run up there that could bring those water levels 5 to 8 feet, maybe more, above the normal high tide line. So move your property back now. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather. We'll see you right here again tomorrow.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.